Welcome to Fact Check China. Today we'll look into why China decided to ban BBC World News from the country. We'll also review a number of claims made by the Chinese state-controlled media outlet, the Global Times. China's announcement to ban BBC World News from being aired in the country comes 1 week after the British media regulator Ofcom said it had withdrawn a license for CGTN to broadcast in the UK. CGTN, or China Global Television Network, is a Chinese state-controlled media that was reported to be spreading political views and ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party. Ofcom ruled that the CGTN repeatedly breached impartiality standards with its coverage of the protests in Hong Kong. In return, China's Foreign Ministry criticized the BBC for its coverage of China's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and dismissed its report as fake news. Yeah, fake news. Sounds familiar, right?
You are fake news.
Yeah, I thought you'd miss him. Prior to that, Beijing has repeatedly expressed frustration with BBC's reporting on China's crackdown on Uighurs and other ethnic Muslim minorities in Xinjiang. And on the 11th of February, China's National Radio Television Administration claimed in a statement that BBC World News had broadcast reports on China that infringed the principles of truthfulness and impartiality in journalism. Radio Television Hong Kong is an independent but government-funded service based in Hong Kong. It announced that it would suspend relay of BBC World Service and BBC News Weekly. The University of Hong Kong's head of journalism and media studies, Dr. Keith Richburg, has this to say.
Hong Kong is supposedly still autonomous, first of all. And so a decision, like this seems to have been something that would have been ordered either by the Hong Kong government for RTHK or coming from the top from China and relayed to RTHK. It doesn't seem like the people who make editorial decisions at RTHK would do something like this unless they were under some direction to. At least that's what we would think. And because of the autonomy of RTHK and its editorial independence, they air critical stories all the time. They've gotten in trouble, as you know, for airing critical stories about Hong Kong. So the idea that they would, punish the BBC by taking it off RTHK off the air, people want to get to the bottom of exactly why that decision was made and who made it, who ordered them to do it, or who suggested they do it.
According to the US think tank Freedom House, China has a long history of suppressing independent media and the freedom of speech. It has the world's most sophisticated censorship system and one of the most restrictive media environments. Reporters Without Borders actually ranked China as the 4th worst country in the world for press freedom, with North Korea topping the chart. Now let's review the claims made by the Global Times. First of all, they question the validity of BBC's report on China's mistreatment of Uighur women as, quote, the report lacks factual basis as the same interviewee have appeared in almost every round of smear campaigns, end quote. That's actually quite creative, because if I were accused of rape, I imagine the same woman would appear on every statement made against me, right? And China actually believes that makes a good defense? Since May 2019, France 24, ABC Nightline, the BBC, and several other media have all reported similar atrocities in China. Together, they have interviewed at least 5 named individuals, plus numerous unnamed witnesses, for their own protection, of course. All 5 named individuals were Uighur women who have lived in China, and they have all made strikingly similar accounts of events. Next, China claims that because the machines widely used in Xinjiang's cotton farms, there is no reason to employ forced labor. But back in October 2019, China's own state-controlled media, China News, was already bragging about Uyghur hand-picking cotton in Xinjiang. In August 2020, New York Times reported a coalition of 190 organizations from 36 countries issued a call to action to end Uyghur forced labor. The Sino-British Joint Declaration is an international treaty signed by the UK and China in 1984. It was registered at the United Nations by both governments the following year. It describes the sovereignty and administrative arrangements of Hong Kong after being handed over to China in 1997. The Chinese government has repeatedly claimed that this treaty is a historical document and is no longer binding. Therefore, Britain has no right to intervene whether or not China abides by the terms of this treaty. Dr. Alvin Cheung from the U.S. Asia Law Institute spoke about the topic at a venue in NYU School of Law in 2017.
Would that were the case, because what Beijing has also done over the past few years is attack the notion that the joint declaration is binding at all. And they've done this primarily in two ways. One, they've said, well, the joint declaration has fulfilled its purpose. It lapsed in 1997. Once the Union flag went down and the 5 stars went up, that was it. The second argument they've made is that the operative parts of the joint declaration, namely Article 3 and Annex 1, where the basic policies are set out, were unilateral. And so they were never binding anyway. And if you look back at the provisions of the joint declaration, you will see as clear as day that neither of these arguments holds up. This hasn't stopped Beijing or indeed Hong Kong officials from making them anyway. In 2014, in response to the UK House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee's inquiry, Sir Richard Ottaway, who was then chairman of the committee, was told in no uncertain terms that the joint declaration is now void and only cover the period from the signing in 1984 until the handover in 1997. Well, that's a very odd interpretation of shall remain unchanged for 50 years, isn't it? And we saw that again with one of the quotes that I opened with. But it's not just Beijing. We've seen this argument taken up by Hong Kong government officials as well. Now, this is a rather lengthy extract from the Ming Pao, one of the newspapers of record in Hong Kong. And it refers to a statement by then Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Raymond Tam. And he said, in essence, as you can see from the part highlighted in red, that the main part of the joint declaration has already been fulfilled and has finished and has completed its objectives. He actually goes on to say there as well that the reference to Article 3 and being unchanged for 50 years was a unilateral declaration. So actually we have a twofer here. So which one is it? He can't even get his story straight. Is it that Article 3 was never binding in the first place? Or is it that once the handover happened on 1st of July 1997, Beijing could wash its hands of the whole thing? He's not sure which story to advance, and neither, it turns out, is the Foreign Ministry. Because a few days after making the statement which I referred to at the beginning, we see this. Beijing conceded that the joint declaration was legally binding, but insisted it didn't give Britain the right to interfere in the city's affairs. Well, that's a very odd interpretation. This contract is binding, except that the other party to the contract can't enforce the contract. That's what that amounts to. And we see again, China's basic Hong Kong policies were unilateral. Well, that is a very creative interpretation, which amounts to striking out both Article 7 and Article 8. Now, I'm going to arguably go beyond my remit here and say that this is part of a pattern of broader contempt for public international law in respect of Hong Kong.
China also tried to justify Hong Kong police brutality against what they called violent protesters. Well, see for yourselves.
In this video, another protester stands near officers. Riot police pull him to the ground and beat him. He is taken to the sidewalk and arrested. In another incident, a man who is distributing water is attacked by the police. Officers pepper spray him, punch him, and beat him with batons. One officer puts him in a chokehold. In some cases, commanders participate in the violence. They are identified by white shirts. When this protester falls to the ground, 2 commanders are among a group of police who attack her with batons and shields. And this woman said she was dragged for about 150 meters to the Legislative Council by a commander. All of the protesters shown here were arrested and later released, some on bail. Dr. Rohini Har, an expert in crowd control, said these police actions were unjustified.
The video suggests cause for concern that this is disproportionate and excessive force. This is basically like an essay on how not to police a protest movement.
Small groups of protesters who tried to disrupt the metro system during rush hour. At least 1 arrest has been made. Over the weekend, there were brutal scenes of police violence following chaotic protests. Passengers filmed police storming a train compartment, beating passengers, and using pepper spray.
The Chinese government claims that it never used violence to control the COVID outbreak, and the BBC used insinuating shooting and editing tricks to make them look bad. Well, let's see what shooting angles and editing tricks the people in China use with their mobile phones, shall we?
起来了。
哦，进去了，看到没有？
他们。
哇，太可怕了！
电焊，那电焊工在那块焊的，那中间是一个门，你看。
电焊都拿来了，我。
把这个单元门给焊住了。
妈，搁7号楼的门都焊死了。你想出来，就留一个小窗户送菜，还要付钱呢，还卖烟呢，你看又吸烟，
完了，把门洞都焊死了，不让出屋了。下一个就是我们6号楼了，就是我家了。
不是没有制裁，你用的牌。
我叫。 你屋里有米有面吧？有菜吧？你屋里有米有菜吧？有是吧？有的不要吃了，我们咱把个门锁了，马姐电话号码，有没有情况给我们打电话，好吧？
Thank you for watching. Please like and share with your friends, and please don't forget to subscribe.